For 2 years I lived in the same town as my teacher. And every day I would go to his temple, to Gonzoji, and do zazen, and then I would clean the grounds. And sometimes I was alone. I was the only one there in the morning. And that was fine. But sometimes they would forget to leave the door unlocked. So I would get there and see that I couldn't get in. And so on those mornings I would sit on the front steps and do zazen there. And it would get really cold some days really hot. And I'd just sit on those stone steps and listen to all the sounds of the bugs and the wind. One day I remember really, really well. One morning they had a dog who was a little skittish. He wasn't a big fan of me. I was sitting there. This was probably late fall. I remember it was cold but not terrible. And I could see my breath. And I was very still. And the dog appeared from behind the bushes and suddenly was right in front of me. And I could feel the dog so tense, trying to understand what was happening. There was this person, but this person wasn't moving. And I was so alert in that moment. So conscious of the fact that if I moved or if I said something, if I tried to break this tension with this dog, that I might scare it and that it might be dangerous. So I just sat there and I continued to breathe very slowly and to look forward. And I could feel my heart in my chest. And the dog watched me and basically did the same thing I did for a long time. And eventually walked away. And why do I tell this story? A few months ago, after a talk when we were all discussing something, I don't remember what, Joanne made this wonderful comment. She made a reference to zazen as doing zazen as animals. And then she said, doing zazen as chunks of meat with a beating heart. And that has stuck with me all this time. Partly because I love the phrase, partly because I love the image, but also because it really captures something about the nature of zazen that I think is not articulated often enough or well enough. And so I thought tonight I would make a quick stab at it. Some of our kids' friends recently, they were, I don't even know what kind of bird, but they were hatching eggs in their home. They had a bunch and they had an incubator. And so they had the temperature just right, and they had these lamps, they had little blankets, and they had it perfectly taken care of, and they were very conscious about keeping it quiet, and everything was just right for these birds, and the birds hatched. It was really, for kids, there's nothing more fun. I think there is a natural inclination and a perfectly understandable inclination when we meditate, when we do zazen, when we take up some sort of spiritual practice, to imagine that what we're doing is we're creating an incubator for the mind or for the self, for who I am. So we hear these instructions that say you're supposed to sit like this with your back straight, and you hold your hands like this. and your eyes are just so, and your breathing is like this. And we get the message that if I sit right and if I breathe right, then I'm holding my mind up, like an egg. I'm holding it just the way it needs to be held to do the thing that it needs to do. All of this is in support of this. I think it would be surprising not to think that. And what does it look like to hold this? Well, I think we would imagine that it involves some pretty deep thoughts. Or some pretty profound insight. Or that it holds a kind of cultivated awareness. This focus, this energy. All of which, even as I'm saying it, even as I'm kind of trying to make fun of it, it sounds really nice. But I think there is a very different way of understanding what we're doing. And that in order to explore that, we need to remind ourselves of that. Because it is so counter to what we usually would imagine this to be. And what that is speaks to what Joanne was talking about. This idea of doing zazen as animals. Of being chunks of meat with a beating heart. Right now, as you're sitting there, as you're listening, just be still. Notice the way that you're breathing. Not the way, sorry. But the feeling of it. Notice where your hands are. And the sensation in your hands. The sensation between your shoulder blades. The sensation in your nose. And then inside all of that, see if you can find your own heartbeat. Can you feel it beating in your chest? Because when I go through all the instructions I've ever received for doing zazen, I'm only ever being invited to do that. We're told to sit like this and to notice that we're sitting like this, to remember to continue to sit like this, regardless of conditions. We're told to hold our hands, to hold our shoulders, to hold our neck, and to breathe. None of these are particularly deep functions. If this is what we're doing, and if we're being told to always come back to these things as primary, then what we're being told to come back to is this awareness of being alive. Of being physical animals. It's true that with reflection and with the interrogation of our thoughts, there's a lot we can figure out. There's a lot that we can see. But there's another side of that, which is that we don't have a problem understanding ourselves as humans. For the most part, we only understand ourselves as humans. And what I mean by that is we imagine ourselves, we understand ourselves to be these thinking beings. We understand ourselves as vessels of the mind. No one needs to train us to do that. It's what we do from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, regardless of our activity. And then, occasionally, we get reminded of something else. We get reminded that we are also something else. We're injured, for example, and pulled into the body, maybe in a way that we don't want to be. We notice how hard it is to breathe. We notice how hard it is to stand up or to use this hand, whatever it is. And we're brought out of the mind, out of this conception of ourselves as just thoughts. Some people experience chronic pain. They always have that thread, that constant reminder. That they are not just thoughts. They are not just seeing. There's something primal. Zazen, though it's rarely spoken of in this way, is an invitation to understand ourselves as physical beings, as beings who are simply alive. To notice what it is to be alive right now, the work of being alive, the choice to breathe in and the choice to breathe out, the choice to hold ourselves in the world. I think without exception, all of my teachers, and then most of the people that I really have spent a lot of time with in the practice, have developed over time a preference for doing zazen in the cold. Not the freezing cold, but in an uncomfortably cold room. Why? Part of it is simply that it keeps you awake, which is nice. But part of it is that there is an alertness that goes with being cold that is different from the alertness of concentration. It's a different kind of being awake. Because on some level, you're aware as you breathe in and as you breathe out that you are surviving, which is what we're always doing. I want to say how profound this is. I want to say how worthy this is of investigation. But I think that sends the wrong message. What I really want to say is that this is enough. This is sufficient. This is a practice not necessarily of understanding who you are, of studying who you are, of asking who you are, but maybe a practice of coming to really get what you are, And what you are is an animal. What you are, to use Joanne's phrase, is a chunk of meat with a beating heart. But what you are is also enough. And that's where I'll stop.